Picture this: a blackened landscape, volcanic ash rising with every footstep, the air thick with sulfur and the metallic tang of blood. It's February 20th, 1945, and Japanese defenders peer through reinforced concrete apertures, watching a column of American Sherman tanks crawl across the hellscape of Iwo Jima. Nothing unusual. They've seen these tanks before, trained to destroy them, prepared to die stopping them. But then, one tank stops. Its turret rotates with mechanical precision, and where a 75mm cannon should be, there's something else entirely. A sound tears through the air, not the thunder of artillery, something different. A violent hiss, like the earth itself releasing its fury. Then comes the fire. Not bullets, not shells. Fire. A liquid inferno that arcs through the air like a dragon's breath, stretching impossibly far, 150 yards of molten death that splashes against concrete, flows through firing ports, and floods the bunker with temperatures that turn steel molten and men to ash in seconds. The screams don't last long. Within minutes, phone lines across the Japanese defensive network crackle with panicked reports. A new weapon, something they'd never encountered, something that turned their greatest advantage, their impenetrable underground fortress, into a crematorium. 8 modified tanks, a secret so closely guarded that even most Marines didn't know they existed until the moment they unleashed hell. This is the story of how a handful of Navy construction workers and Army engineers working in secret in Hawaii created the weapon that would break the back of the most fortified position in the Pacific War. This is the story of innovation born from desperation, of technology that saved thousands of American lives while creating moral questions that haunt survivors to this day. This is the story of the flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima and how 8 machines changed warfare forever. The fortress that couldn't be broken. To understand why these weapons became necessary, you first need to understand what the Americans were facing. Iwo Jima wasn't just defended, it was transformed. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi arrived on the island in June 1944 with a mission that defied Japanese military tradition. He wasn't there to win. He knew that was impossible. The Americans had overwhelming naval superiority, air dominance, and industrial capacity that Japan simply couldn't match. No, Kuribayashi's mission was something else entirely. Make the conquest of Iwo Jima so catastrophically expensive in American blood that the United States would reconsider the invasion of mainland Japan. And to do that, he would abandon every principle of Japanese military doctrine. No glorious beach defenses, no suicidal banzai charges, no warriors seeking honorable death in open combat against superior firepower. Instead, Kuribayashi ordered his 21,000 men to do something revolutionary: disappear underground. For an entire year, Japanese engineers worked with obsessive precision. They carved 11 miles of interconnected tunnels with plans for 17 total, reaching 7 stories deep into volcanic rock. They created 5,000 caves and chambers, some large enough to hold 400 men. They constructed 1,500 fortified positions with concrete walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with salvaged steel. Every single inch of the island surface fell under overlapping fields of fire. Machine gun nests positioned to create killing zones. Artillery spotters hidden in spider holes who could call down precision fire within seconds. Communication centers buried 75 feet underground, connected by miles of telephone wire. The tunnel system itself was an engineering masterpiece. Ventilation shafts disguised as natural formations, underground hospitals with full operating theaters, storage chambers stocked with supplies for 2 months. The largest chamber beneath Hill 382 stretched 50 meters long and 20 meters wide. An entire battalion could shelter there, invisible to American reconnaissance. But the most terrifying aspect of Kuribayashi's plan was psychological. His orders to every commander were explicit and chilling. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans. Do the math. 21,000 defenders, each killing 10 Americans before they die. That's 210,000 casualties, more than the entire invasion force. The Americans knew Iwo Jima would be difficult. Intelligence suggested strong defenses, but they had no idea what awaited them. For 74 consecutive days, American bombers dropped 6,800 tons of explosives. Naval guns hurled 22,000 shells. The island disappeared under clouds of smoke and pulverized rock. Surely planners thought nothing could survive that kind of punishment. They projected the island would fall in 5 days. They were catastrophically, tragically wrong. When the smoke cleared, fewer than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions had been damaged. The tunnel system remained virtually intact. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't been scratched. The Americans were about to walk into a killing field unlike anything they'd faced in the Pacific War. They needed something new, something the Japanese hadn't planned for, something that could reach into those underground fortresses and drag the defenders out, or incinerate them where they hid. 5 months before D-Day, in an unmarked warehouse at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, something extraordinary was taking shape. Colonel George F. Unmocked commanded the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service's most classified project in the Pacific, CNPAC. His mission was straightforward, but seemingly impossible. Develop a weapon system capable of neutralizing cave and bunker complexes that had proven immune to everything else in the American arsenal. Unmocked assembled a unique team. The 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company for technical expertise, but the real innovation came from 25 men of the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the legendary Seabees, whose mechanical genius had solved impossible problems across the Pacific. Leading the technical development were 2 men whose names should be remembered alongside any weapon designer in history: Machinist Mate First Class A. Riker and Electrician Mate Second Class Joseph Kissel. These weren't theoretical engineers working from blueprints. These were practical men who'd seen Marines die trying to assault fortified positions. They understood the problem intimately. It wasn't about firepower. It was about applying firepower to an enemy fighting from underground. Previous attempts at tank-mounted flamethrowers had been disappointing at best. The Canadian Ronson system, crude, unreliable, with a pathetic range of 60 to 80 yards and fuel for barely 40 seconds of fire. The Army's early designs were essentially portable flamethrowers bolted onto tank hulls, maintenance nightmares that malfunctioned 40% of the time. Riker and Kissel decided to start over. They located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks, 35 tons of American engineering, powered by 500 horsepower Ford V8s with armor thick enough to withstand Japanese anti-tank guns. Then came the real innovation, combining the best elements from 3 existing flamethrower systems: British, American, and captured German designs from North Africa. What they created was designated the CBH-1, Construction Battalion Hawaii Model 1. The specifications were revolutionary. Operating pressure 300 pounds per square inch, 3 times previous designs. Maximum range 150 yards with thickened fuel, nearly 3 times the distance of portable flamethrowers. The fuel itself was a carefully calibrated blend: diesel, gasoline, and napalm thickener that would burn at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. But here's what made it truly deadly. The flamethrower replaced the tank's main gun entirely, using the Sherman's existing turret and fire control systems. Full 270-degree traverse, elevation from -10 to +35 degrees. A gunner could aim this weapon with the same precision as a conventional cannon. No special training required, no indication to the enemy that anything was different, until the moment fire erupted from the barrel. The conversion process was brutal. 150 pounds of welding rod per tank, 1,100 electrical connections, each one critical, 1,200 man-hours of work, 150 custom-machined parts. Cost per conversion? $20,000 to $25,000, equivalent to $360,000 today.
Riker and Kissel worked 20-hour days in brutal Hawaiian heat. They slept in shifts beside their equipment. They were racing against time, knowing that Marines would soon be dying on a volcanic island, while Japanese defenders laughed at American artillery from inside their underground fortresses. By January 1945, they had 8 completed tanks, 8 modified Shermans that looked exactly like standard models, 8 weapons that would change everything. The crews didn't fully understand what they'd been given until they were already at sea, sailing toward Iwo Jima. February 19, 1945. D-Day. The 8 flamethrower tanks came ashore in the 5th wave, around 1,000 hours, mixed among regular Sherman tanks. Official designation: M4A3 The Marines called them by their numbers, 431 through 438. Navy orders were explicit: keep them in reserve. Don't commit these valuable, irreplaceable assets until the tactical situation is clear. So they sat, near the beach, while Marines died by the hundreds trying to advance through volcanic ash that rose to their calves with every step, while conventional tactics failed catastrophically against positions that artillery couldn't touch and naval gunfire couldn't penetrate. The first day's casualties were staggering: 2,420 killed or wounded. By nightfall, the invasion force had advanced less than 700 yards, far short of objectives that called for capturing the first airfield. Standard Sherman tanks bogged down in the ash or were destroyed by concealed anti-tank guns. The beach became a slaughterhouse. February 20th, D+1. The situation was desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down at Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 concrete pillboxes dominated the approach, their interlocking machine gun fire creating a 200-yard kill zone. 2 rifle companies had been decimated attempting frontal assault. The regiment had suffered 35% casualties in less than 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis made the decision that would change everything. He called for the flamethrower tanks. At 14:20 hours, Tank 431, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, a veteran of Saipan and Tinian, approached the Japanese positions. To the defenders, it looked like another standard Sherman attempting the same failed assault that had already killed dozens of Marines. Inside the tank, the 5-man crew prepared for action. Driver Private First Class James Morrison guided them through volcanic ash that threatened to immobilize the 35-ton vehicle. Loader Corporal Anthony Vitelli checked the fuel pressure gauges. 300 psi, optimal. Gunner Corporal Thomas Carlson peered through his periscope, tracking the nearest pillbox. At 125 yards, Meza gave the order. Gunner, flamethrower, pillbox, fire. The CBH-1 erupted with a sound witnesses described as the devil's own blowtorch. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel oil arced through the air, propelled by compressed nitrogen. The burning liquid struck the pillbox aperture with devastating accuracy, splashing through the machine gun port and flowing inside like lava. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Temperatures inside the concrete structure soared past 1,200 degrees in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so rapidly that Japanese soldiers suffocated before the flames reached them. Those who survived the initial blast attempted to flee through rear exits, only to be cut down by Marine riflemen who had learned to position themselves for exactly this outcome. Meza traversed the turret 30 degrees and engaged the second pillbox. This time the defenders were ready. A Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun fired point blank. The shell struck the Sherman's frontal armor and ricocheted skyward. The tank shuddered but continued advancing. Carlson triggered another burst. 15 seconds of continuous fire. Black smoke billowed from every aperture of the fortification. The third pillbox required different tactics. Its position behind a rocky outcropping prevented direct engagement. Meza ordered Morrison to advance within 80 yards, dangerously close to Japanese infantry positions. As the tank crested a small rise, Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes, rushing forward with satchel charges and magnetic mines. The bow gunner opened fire, but several enemy soldiers reached the vehicle's blind spot. This was the moment the Seabee modifications proved their worth. Unlike standard flamethrower tanks that could only fire forward, the CBH-1's full traverse capability allowed Carlson to swing the turret 180 degrees and fire directly behind the tank. The attacking infantry were consumed by a blazing wall that witnesses said looked like the gates of hell opening. With the 3rd pillbox neutralized, Marines of the 21st Regiment advanced 400 yards in 2 hours, more progress than they'd made in the previous 2 days combined. Word spread rapidly through the Marine communications network. The flamethrower tanks worked. More importantly, they survived. Within 6 hours, all 8 flamethrower tanks were in action across the front. The tactical revolution had begun. The physical destruction was remarkable enough, but something else was happening. Something unprecedented in Japanese military history. Tank 434, supporting the 23rd Marines near the East Boat Basin, destroyed 4 fortified positions in a single afternoon. The crew developed a technique they called corkscrew and burn, approaching in a spiral pattern to avoid anti-tank fire while maintaining continuous flame suppression. But more striking than the destruction was the reaction. Japanese soldiers, trained to die at their posts, indoctrinated to prefer death over surrender, began fleeing positions when they saw the flame tanks approaching. Not occasionally, consistently. Tank 437 pioneered breach and clear tactics with the 24th Marines. The flamethrower would neutralize a position's defenders, then Marine engineers would rush forward with demolition charges to permanently destroy the fortification. In one afternoon, a single flame tank engineer team destroyed 7 bunkers that had stopped an entire battalion's advance for days. But it was Tank 432 that demonstrated the weapon's true psychological power. Supporting the 26th Marines near Mount Suribachi's base, the tank approached a complex of interconnected caves. Commander Sergeant William Patterson ordered his driver to stop 100 yards from the cave entrances. Through his periscope, Patterson could see Japanese soldiers watching from the darkness. He triggered a short burst of flame into the air, a demonstration, a warning. The psychological effect was immediate and unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing from rear exits, abandoning positions they'd been ordered to defend to the death. Marine riflemen were so surprised they initially failed to fire on the enemy retreating. In 30 minutes, an entire defensive sector collapsed without the tank firing a shot directly at enemy positions. This represented the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. Think about that. An enemy so fanatically dedicated to their posts that mass surrender was virtually unknown, running away at the mere threat of incineration.
General Kuribayashi, observing from his command bunker deep beneath the northern plateau, immediately understood the implications. He issued emergency orders designating flame tanks as priority targets. All available anti-tank guns were to concentrate fire on these vehicles. Special suicide assault teams were organized, volunteers who would attack with explosives strapped to their bodies. But the fundamental problem remained insurmountable. The flamethrower tanks looked identical to regular Shermans until they fired. Japanese gunners couldn't identify priority targets until it was too late. The Americans had achieved tactical surprise through mechanical innovation. By nightfall on February 20th, the numbers told the story. 47 fortified positions destroyed. Marine casualties in flame tank-supported sectors down 40% from the previous day. 600 yards of territory gained in areas that had been static for 48 hours. But the most significant statistic was psychological. For the first time in the Pacific War, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers were abandoning positions rather than dying at their posts. The myth of Japanese invincibility in defensive positions was burning away, along with the men who'd believed in it. February 23, 1945, D+4. The same day Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, the flamethrower tanks faced their greatest test. Hill 382, the second highest point on Iwo Jima and the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's northern defenses. The hill was honeycombed with bunkers and tunnels reaching 7 stories underground. Japanese engineers had designed it to be impregnable. Multiple defensive lines, interlocking fields of fire, underground galleries allowing defenders to reappear behind attackers. Previous assaults had failed with casualties exceeding 50%. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had lost 70% of its strength attempting to take just the approaches to the hill. At 0800 hours, 4 flamethrower tanks advanced in echelon formation supported by 6 conventional Shermans and a battalion of Marine infantry. This time, the Japanese were ready. Hidden 75mm mountain guns, larger than the standard 47mm anti-tank weapons, had been positioned specifically to engage flame tanks. As the lead tank crested the first rise, concentrated fire erupted from 3 concealed positions. The first round struck Tank 433's track, immobilizing it. But the crew didn't abandon ship. They continued firing the flamethrower while stationary, creating a curtain of flame that obscured following vehicles and suppressed Japanese positions. This self-sacrifice allowed the other tanks to maneuver through the kill zone. Tank 431 pushed through the smoke, advancing through artillery fire that would have stopped an infantry assault cold. Shell fragments rattled against the armor like hail. Driver Morrison later described navigating by periscope through smoke so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. At 60 yards from the main Japanese bunker complex, Tank 434's flamethrower erupted. But this time, the Japanese had adapted. Engineers had installed steel plates over bunker apertures that could be closed between machine gun bursts. The steel plate glowed cherry red after sustained flame contact. Metal that hot would warp, creating gaps. Rudnitowski maintained fire for 45 seconds, far longer than doctrine recommended, dangerously depleting fuel reserves. The steel plate buckled. The incendiary mixture poured through the gaps. The bunker's interior became an inferno. Ammunition cooked off in explosive chains. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. Secondary explosions revealed tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had carefully concealed. Marine infantry rushed forward with satchel charges, throwing explosives into every opening before the defenders could reorganize. In 3 hours, Hill 382's outer defenses, positions designed to resist indefinitely, had been breached. The impregnable position was falling. But the battle also revealed the flamethrower tank's limitations. Tank 431 exhausted its fuel supply after 80 seconds of continuous operation. Refueling required withdrawing to designated areas where specialized fuel trucks waited, a process that took 2 hours minimum. During that time, Japanese defenders could reinforce and reorganize. The tanks were powerful, but not inexhaustible. And on this same day, something remarkable happened that highlighted the continuing importance of individual courage. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, carrying a 70-pound M2-2 portable flamethrower, advanced on foot into an area where tanks couldn't maneuver, a narrow ravine called the amphitheater. For 4 hours, covered only by 4 riflemen, 2 of whom would die protecting him, Williams destroyed 7 pillboxes that were inaccessible to armored vehicles. His actions would earn him the Medal of Honor. He would become the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, passing away in June 2022 at age 98. His citation read in part, "Quick to volunteer his services when our tanks were maneuvering vainly to open a lane for the infantry, Corporal Williams daringly went forward alone to attempt the reduction of devastating machine gun fire from the unyielding positions." The lesson was clear. Technology had changed warfare, but it hadn't eliminated the need for extraordinary human courage. By early March, the battle had shifted to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, a hellscape of sulfur pits, twisted ravines, and volcanic rock formations that made tank operations nearly impossible. Marines named it the meat grinder after suffering 850 casualties taking a single hill. Tanks that attempted to navigate the broken ground threw tracks on sharp volcanic rocks or bellied out on obstacles invisible beneath the ash. The flamethrower tanks adapted again. Unable to maneuver freely, they became mobile pillboxes, positioned at key points to support infantry advances. Marine engineers from the 5th Engineer Battalion worked through the night, often under sniper fire, constructing ramps and clearing paths, allowing flame tanks to reach positions previously thought inaccessible. When direct assault proved impossible, the tanks fired indirectly, bouncing flame streams off rocks to reach around corners and into defilated positions. On March 8th, D+17, Tank 436 achieved what crews called the impossible shot. Supporting the 9th Marines' assault on Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face. Tank Commander Sergeant Daniel Foster calculated that flame fired at maximum elevation might arc over the cliff edge and fall into Japanese positions from above. The physics were marginal. The CBH-1 could elevate to 35 degrees, but reaching the target required a 40-degree angle. Foster ordered his driver to position the tank on a pile of rubble created by naval bombardment, tilting the entire vehicle backward. With the tank precariously balanced and enemy mortar rounds falling around them, Gunner Vitelli triggered the flamethrower. The molten napalm arced high into the air, seemed to hang for a moment at its apex, then cascaded down into the Japanese positions like judgment from heaven. The effect was devastating, not just physically, but psychologically. Japanese soldiers had believed their elevated positions were immune to flamethrower attack. That assumption died in the inferno. Witnesses reported Japanese soldiers leaping from the cliffs rather than burn alive, choosing death by falling over death by fire. By mid-March, the flamethrower tanks had evolved into the centerpiece of a combined arms system. Each flame tank operated with a dedicated support team. Conventional tanks for suppressing enemy anti-tank guns, infantry for close protection against suicide attackers, engineers for obstacle clearance, and ammunition carriers bringing forward the 300-gallon fuel trailers that extended operational time. The fuel logistics alone required extraordinary effort. Electricians mate second-class Kissel, one of the original designers, had accompanied the tanks to Iwo Jima to supervise maintenance. He later reported that keeping 8 tanks operational required a supply chain stretching back to Pearl Harbor. Fuel mixing stations operated 24 hours a day, combining diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm powder in precise ratios. The mixture had to be used within 72 hours or it would separate and clog the flame guns. Daily consumption averaged 10,000 gallons, a staggering logistical challenge. The Japanese response continued evolving. Special tank killer teams were formed, volunteers who would attack with explosive charges strapped to their bodies. These human bombs achieved some successes. Tank 438 was destroyed on March 11th when a Japanese soldier detonated himself against the vehicle's engine compartment, killing 3 of the 5 crew members. But such tactics were ultimately futile. For every flame tank damaged, replacements arrived from the beach. Damaged tanks were often repaired and returned to action within days. General Kuribayashi, observing from his command bunker, recognized the strategic implications. In his final report to Imperial Headquarters, transmitted on March 17th, he wrote, "The enemy's special flamethrower tanks have proven more effective than all their artillery and aerial bombardment combined. They achieve in minutes what conventional weapons cannot accomplish in days. We have no effective counter to this weapon. The Americans have not just superior numbers, but superior imagination." His words were prophetic. The revolution in military affairs that began with 8 flame tanks at Iwo Jima would continue through guided missiles, precision weapons, and cyber warfare. The principle remained constant. Technological innovation defeats traditional tactics. Imagination triumphs over convention.
The crescendo came during the final week of March. Marines pushed into the gorge,
Kuribayashi's last stronghold. This twisted maze of ravines and caves, nicknamed Bloody Gorge by Marines who fought there, represented the ultimate test of American tactical innovation versus Japanese defensive determination. In an area less than 700 yards square, the remaining 3,000 Japanese defenders prepared to make their last stand. On March 21st, D+30, all operational flamethrower tanks, 6 of the original 8, with 2 under repair, concentrated for a coordinated assault. They'd been reinforced by 4 additional flame tanks rushed from Hawaii, though these newer models used the less effective Ronson system with only 60 to 80 yards range. The assault would be the largest concentration of flame weapons in the Pacific War. Tank 431, repaired after being disabled on Hill 382, led the advance. Its armor bore the scars of combat, welded patches where shell fragments had penetrated, dents from dozens of hits that failed to penetrate, scorch marks from near misses. The assault began at 1,000 hours, with the tanks advancing in a crescent formation, creating overlapping fields of flame that left no dead space for Japanese defenders to exploit. Marine infantry followed in their wake, throwing white phosphorus grenades into cave entrances to mark targets. Engineers with demolition charges sealed positions after the flamethrowers had cleared them. The Japanese resistance was fanatical but increasingly futile. Suicide squads charged from hidden spider holes only to be incinerated before reaching their targets. Anti-tank guns fired point blank, their crews maintaining fire even as flames engulfed their positions. In one extraordinary incident, a Japanese officer emerged from a bunker carrying a samurai sword, charging directly at Tank 434. The tank's bow gunner held fire, perhaps from shock or respect, allowing Marine riflemen to cut down the officer just yards from the vehicle. His sword was later recovered and sent to Marine Corps headquarters as a symbol of the enemy's desperate courage. By sunset on March 21st, the gorge had been penetrated. Over 800 Japanese defenders lay dead, many burned beyond recognition. The flamethrower tanks had consumed 8,000 gallons of fuel mixture in a single day, a record for the campaign. Marine casualties, while still significant at 92 killed and 257 wounded, were a fraction of what conventional assault would have cost. But the price of victory was becoming apparent on both sides. Tank crews reported severe psychological trauma from their role in the slaughter. Corporal Carlson of Tank 431 later testified, quote, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but you heard it. Sometimes at night, I still hear it. We did what we had to do, but I'll never forget the smell. Burning flesh mixed with sulfur from the volcanic rock. Maintenance crews found human remains fused to tank tracks, requiring blowtorches to remove." On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secure. The battle had lasted 36 days instead of the projected 5. American casualties totaled 26,038, including 6,821 killed. Numbers that shocked the American public and military leadership alike. Japanese losses were nearly total. Of approximately 21,000 defenders, only 216 survived as prisoners. The rest died fighting, or, in increasing numbers as the battle progressed, by suicide rather than face capture or death by flame. Post-action analysis credited the flamethrower tanks with reducing American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men. They had destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions, consumed 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, and fundamentally changed Marine Corps assault doctrine. But perhaps most significantly, they had broken the myth of Japanese invincibility in defensive positions. Captain Frank Caldwell, commanding Company F, 26th Marines, provided perhaps the most succinct assessment. Quote, "It was the flame tank more than any other supporting arm that won this battle.
Artillery, naval gunfire, and aerial bombardment could not rout the Japanese from their underground fortresses. The flamethrower tanks did what nothing else could. Statistical analysis revealed the true impact. Over 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima were caused by flame weapons. In sectors where flame tanks operated, the rate of advance increased by 300%. Japanese prisoners numbered 216, more than the combined total from Tarawa, Saipan, and Pelelu. Many prisoners specifically cited fear of burning alive as their reason for surrendering. The tactical implications extended far beyond Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional flamethrower tanks for future operations. Colonel Unmach's team at Schofield Barracks went into overdrive production, developing the improved CBH-2 model with increased range and reliability. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks were ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan that would never come, thanks to the atomic bomb. The Army, observing Marine success, accelerated its own flamethrower tank program. The entire 713th Tank Battalion was converted to flame tanks for the Okinawa campaign, where they would consume 200,000 gallons of fuel mixture, proving equally effective against Japanese cave complexes. But the strategic implications reached beyond battlefield tactics. The Japanese military doctrine, refined over centuries, had failed catastrophically against American technological innovation. The flamethrower tanks represented something more than a new weapon. They embodied the transformation of warfare from individual courage to industrial capability. The seers who created these weapons received little public recognition. Riker and Kissel returned to civilian life after the war, their names forgotten except in obscure technical reports. Colonel Unmacht continued developing chemical weapons until retirement, his contribution known only to a few military historians. Yet their innovation had saved thousands of American lives and shortened one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The tank crews faced different challenges. Many struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The memory of human beings turned to ash, of screams cut short by consuming flame, haunted men who had done what duty demanded. Sergeant Meza never spoke of his service until shortly before his death in 1993, telling his grandson, quote, "We did what we had to do. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." The Japanese perspective emerged slowly through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. Lieutenant Yamada, who had witnessed the first flamethrower tank attack on February 20th, survived as one of the 216 prisoners. In post-war testimony to American intelligence officers, he reflected, quote, "We had prepared for every form of death, bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that sought us out in our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways no conventional weapon could. They turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." Former Sergeant Masao Hayashi, captured after being burned while fleeing a bunker, provided graphic testimony. Quote, "The napalm came like a flood, pouring into every space. Men tried to escape through emergency exits, but found more flames waiting. Some shot themselves rather than burn. Others ran into American gunfire, preferring bullets to incineration. I saw warriors who had fought since China refuse to enter positions after seeing flame tanks approaching. This was not the death we had trained for."
In 1945, a reconciliation ceremony was held on Iwo Jima. Former tank commander Robert Meza and former Lieutenant Yamada, who had witnessed the first flame tank attack 40 years earlier, stood together where Tank 431 had first fired. Yamada spoke through an interpreter. "I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I cannot forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." Meza responded simply, "We were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today." The two old warriors embraced as the sun set over Iwo Jima's black sand beaches. Behind them, Mount Suribachi rose against the darkening sky. The island that had once burned with combat fury had returned to peace. Today, the last surviving flamethrower tank from Iwo Jima sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Tank 434 bears the scars of its service, welding marks where armor was patched, dents from shell impacts, scratches from volcanic rock. A small plaque notes its specifications and battle history. What it cannot convey is the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the smell of burning napalm mixed with sulfur, the sight of liquid fire flowing like water into underground fortresses. Visitors often pass quickly, disturbed by the weapon's terrible purpose. School children on field trips ask why anyone would create such a horrible weapon. Veterans who understand its history pause longer. Some salute. Others simply stare in silent remembrance. For them, the tank represents not glorification of war, but recognition of war's terrible necessities. The last reunion of Iwo Jima flame tank veterans was held in 2015 on the battle's 70th anniversary. Only 3 crew members attended, all in their 90s. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, former gunner on Tank 436, offered perhaps the most poignant observation. People ask if I'm proud of what we did. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough. The men who designed, built, and operated these machines have almost all passed into history. The last living memory of flame warfare's terrible reality has faded with them. But the lesson remains, carved in fire across volcanic islands in the Pacific. In the end, the Battle of Iwo Jima was won not by courage alone, though courage there was in abundance on both sides, but by the marriage of American industrial capability and battlefield innovation. 8 modified Sherman tanks, 8 weapons that represented the convergence of technology, tactics, and determination that would define American military supremacy for generations to come. They were weapons of their time, necessary evils in a war that demanded total victory. The Japanese defenders had fought with unparalleled bravery, following orders to resist to the death. They had built the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific War, a subterranean fortress that conventional weapons could not reduce. But they had not anticipated incendiary weapons that poured like molten rain, seeking out every cave and bunker, turning their underground sanctuary into a crematorium. Their defeat was not a failure of courage, but a collision with superior technology and innovation. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima, now returned to Japan and renamed Iwoto, bears few visible scars of the battle that once raged across its surface. Nature has reclaimed the battlefield, covering shell craters with vegetation, filling trenches with volcanic soil. But beneath the surface, sealed caves and collapsed tunnels still hold the remains of soldiers who died in the flames, their sacrifice remembered by ever fewer living witnesses. The transformation represented by the flamethrower tanks extended far into the post-war period. The United States Marine Corps, analyzing the success at Iwo Jima, fundamentally restructured its assault doctrine around combined arms tactics, integrating armor, infantry, and engineers. The concept of specialized armor for specific battlefield problems became standard military thinking. Future weapons development would prioritize adaptability and innovation over pure firepower. The technology itself continued evolving. The M4A3 Sherman flamethrower tanks served in Korea, where they proved equally effective against Chinese bunker complexes during the battles for the Punch Bowl at Heartbreak Ridge. Marine flame tanks destroyed over 300 Chinese positions during the Korean War, though with less dramatic effect due to better Chinese awareness of the weapon's capabilities. The last American flamethrower tank, The M132 armored flamethrower based on the M113 armored personnel carrier wasn't retired until 1978, ending a weapons lineage that began with 8 hastily modified Shermans in a secret warehouse in Hawaii. By then, thermobaric weapons and precision-guided munitions had replaced flamethrowers as the primary means of defeating fortified positions. International law eventually restricted flamethrower use, with Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons limiting incendiary weapons. The weapon that had been decisive at Iwo Jima became controversial as public opinion shifted against weapons deemed excessively cruel. Yet military historians note the irony. The flamethrower tanks, for all their horror, had shortened the battle and potentially saved thousands of lives that conventional assault would have claimed. The industrial achievement cannot be understated. The United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks during World War II. Only 354 were converted to flamethrower configuration. Yet these few hundred vehicles had impact far exceeding their numbers. At Iwo Jima, 8 tanks changed the course of a battle that might have lasted months and cost tens of thousands more casualties. Military analysts calculated that each flame tank at Iwo Jima potentially prevented 625 American casualties, based on casualty rates in unsupported versus flame-supported attacks. In the cold calculus of war, the investment in technology had paid dividends in blood not spilled. Colonel Unmach's classified reports, declassified in the 1970s, revealed the frantic pace of innovation that produced the flame tanks. The production statistics tell their own story. 354 flame tanks produced by war's end. 226,343 gallons of flamethrower fuel manufactured. Napalm mixing plants capable of producing 1,000 gallons per day. Industrial capability replicated across the Pacific. This meant American forces could literally burn their way through Japanese defenses, a terrifying demonstration of industrial might wedded to tactical necessity. The Japanese Army archives, open to researchers in the 1980s, provide the enemy perspective on facing flame tanks. Report after report describes the paralysis of watching liquid fire approach, knowing that concrete and steel offered no protection. Orders to hold positions to the death became meaningless when death came as flowing fire that sought out every hiding place. One Japanese report noted, "The flame tanks negated every advantage of our defensive positions. Height meant nothing when fire could arc over obstacles. Depth meant nothing when flame flowed like water into our tunnels. Concrete and steel that could withstand tons of explosives were useless against liquid fire." General Kuribashi's final message, transmitted just before his death in late March 1945, contained a prescient observation. The Americans have not just defeated us with superior numbers or firepower. They have defeated us with superior imagination, turning our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into death traps. Future wars will belong to nations that can imagine new forms of warfare, not those that perfect old ones. His prediction proved devastatingly accurate.
The revolution in military affairs that began with 8 flame tanks at Iwo Jima continued through guided missiles, precision weapons, stealth technology, and cyber warfare. The principle remained constant across generations. Technological innovation defeats traditional tactics. Imagination triumphs over convention. But beyond the statistics and strategic implications lies a question that haunted the survivors and continues to challenge us today. What is the moral cost of military efficiency? The flamethrower tanks were extraordinarily effective. They saved thousands of American lives. They shortened a brutal battle that might have dragged on for months. They contributed to ultimate victory in a war against genuine evil. Yet they did so by turning human beings into ash, by creating a weapon so terrifying that men chose suicide over facing it, by industrializing death in ways that challenged traditional concepts of honorable warfare.
The tank crews who survived often struggled with what they had done, the efficiency of killing by fire, the industrial scale of incineration, the screams that lasted only seconds but echoed for decades. Many never spoke of their service, taking their memories to the grave rather than burden others with the horror. Corporal Carlson, in one of his rare interviews before his death in 2004, said, "I used to think about those Japanese soldiers. They were just doing their duty, same as us. They had families, dreams. They probably didn't want to be there any more than we did. But war doesn't care about any of that. War just wants bodies. We gave it bodies, efficiently. That's what still bothers me, how efficient we were at it." This is the paradox of military innovation. The weapons that save your side's lives by increasing killing efficiency create moral questions that survive long after the battle's end. The flamethrower tanks were undeniably successful, but success in war is measured in death, and the manner of that death matters even when the cause is just. In the volcanic soil of Iwo Jima, beneath monuments to courage and sacrifice, lie the remains of over 20,000 Japanese soldiers who died defending positions they believed impregnable. Many were incinerated by weapons they never imagined could exist. Their deaths marked not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era when spiritual dedication could overcome material disadvantage, when warrior ethos could triumph over industrial capability, when courage alone could determine victory. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks that fought at Iwo Jima were machines: steel, aluminum, rubber, and mechanical components assembled by workers who would never see combat. Yet they represented something larger: the mobilization of American industrial might, scientific innovation, and mechanical genius in service of victory. The numbers tell the final story with brutal clarity. 8 flamethrower tanks deployed on D-Day, 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture consumed, over 1,000 fortified positions destroyed, and estimated 5,000 American casualties prevented, over 6,000 Japanese soldiers killed by flame weapons, 36 days of combat that might have stretched to months without flame weapons. The mathematics of modern warfare, where technological advantage translates directly to lives saved and battles won. General Holland Howland Mad Smith, commander of the 5th Amphibious Corps at Iwo Jima, wrote in his memoir, "The flamethrower tanks were the difference between victory and catastrophe. Without them, we would have paid an unbearable price for every yard of that cursed island. They were horrible weapons, but war is horrible business. In the end, they saved more lives than any other weapon we employed." The flames that consumed Japanese positions on Iwo Jima have long since died. The men who wielded them have mostly passed into history. But the revolution they created, the transformation of warfare from individual combat to technological dominance, continues to shape military thinking worldwide. In 8 modified Sherman tanks, America found the weapon that would break the deadlock of the Pacific War's most formidable fortress, forever changing the nature of warfare in the process. The age of warrior ended in flames on a volcanic island in the Pacific. The age of technological warfare had begun. Today, when we look at that silent tank in the Marine Corps Museum, Tank 434, scarred and weathered, its flamethrower nozzle pointed at nothing, we see more than a weapon. We see the convergence of ingenuity and necessity, of courage and horror, of industrial might and human fragility. We see the moment when warfare changed forever, when the future of conflict became not about who had the bravest soldiers, but who had the most imaginative engineers. 8 tanks, 36 days, a revolution written in fire. The battle was over, the war would soon follow, but the echo of those flames, the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the sight of liquid fire flowing into underground fortresses, the screams cut short by consuming heat, would resonate through military history forever. And in the quiet halls of memory, Where old warriors gather in the shadows, they still hear it. The hiss of the flame gun, the roar of ignition, the terrible, efficient sound of war's evolution. Picture this: a blackened landscape, volcanic ash settling after the storm, the air clearing of smoke and sulfur, and in the distance the faint outline of 8 tanks, rolling towards the horizon, towards the next battle, towards the future of warfare itself. Their work here is done, but their legacy burns eternal.